Hi, my name is Joe Hildebrand, and this is Uncommon.
Uncommon is a production by Neural, an agency that helps both brands and talent tell their story. To learn more, just visit neural.com. That's NEURALLE.com. My guest this week, Joey Boy, Joe Hildebrand, journalist, TV and radio presenter, currently writing for news.com.au, as well as presenting on 2GB. Joe, I was trying to come up with angles for icebreakers. I don't know if you've seen this on YouTube, whether you've searched your own name on YouTube, but there's this really, I don't know what the channel was, but you were unknowingly interviewed. This is pre-fame, pre-media days, way back in 1999 at a Star Wars Phantom Menace opening at Burke Street Hoyts.
Was I really?
Yeah. Do you remember that?
Fantastic. I certainly, let's just say it sounds like me. It sounds like me.
I had no idea. Burke Street Hoyt. So where was that on Burke Street?
That was, wouldn't it have been just between Swanston and Russell Street?
Okay, yeah. I know exactly where you're talking about now.
There was a village there, I think. And then there was the Greater Union round the corner, if you wanted to sort of slum it.
Because they've converted all that now. That whole area is a JB, like the whole complex is, well, there's two actually, but that makes so much sense now because one of them is like an Asian focused cinema.
Right.
And like, so there's a bunch of Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants downstairs, and then above is the actual cinemas. So they're still using the cinemas. And we've been there. I went there for a movie randomly. I don't know what it was. But that makes a lot of sense because I was like, who builds a cinema here?
Yeah, I remember in the good old days, there was that was like the main city cinema. And then you would go, and I think there was like a Coles New World or something just next door. And so, of course, the thinking man wouldn't be paying full retail at the popcorn counter at the cinema. You just go in, you'd buy your El Cheapo cheesels and chips and your bag of lollies from the Coles downstairs, and then you just sort of stuff them in your pants and sort of rustle your way past the ticket collector at the front, who was always on the lookout for any smuggled food. And if you made it in, well, that's your night out. Do
you still, because I feel like that's, you're either one or two people, you vehemently believe in the art of the deal. You know, like you must get something from a 7-Eleven or Coles or whatever around the corner, or you like the nostalgia element. So for me, I quite like some of the things that you can get at your local Palace cinemas, but otherwise we always go to the 7-Eleven. What do you lean towards?
My family motto is never pay full retail. I spend my entire life basically trying to scam anything I can, if anything from Flybuys points to supermarket specials. I once, and this is how smart I am, right? Because you've got to work the system. I once tried to join. I did join. I did the Kogan First trial, 30 days, so I could get free delivery on a dishwasher. But then the dishwasher didn't qualify for free delivery, and it would have been, it was like $70. They really stiff you on that thing. And so for some reason it didn't work. So I had to cancel the trial and I had to pay for the delivery of the dishwasher, which was also a bargain. And then I tried to do the same scam again to get free delivery on something else. And they said, oh no, you've already done that. And so I went, all right, fine. So I had to pay like X bucks a month or whatever to get the free delivery on this other thing I was getting. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to pay, $12 a month when I could pay $80 a year and say that. So I joined it for the yearly rate of $80 a year. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, $80 is way more than I'm paying for delivery on this item that I'm trying to get free delivery on. So I better buy some more stuff to get free delivery on that until I get more than $80 worth of delivery. And so I went back, ordered hundreds of bucks more stuff from Kogan to get the free delivery.
Just to get the delivery.
I showed them.
That's like the Amazon Prime trick.
Yeah, and it works every time. And I'm just like throwing away hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars at these things, thinking, oh man, I am so ripping them off.
Where does this? Because this is, this leans in well to my next point. I know you grew up in Dandenong.
Yeah.
So I grew up in sort of southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, played a lot of soccer around
Respect.
Dandenong area. I know you had quite a strong mother figure in your life. Where did this come from? Where's this principle come from?
Mother figure. My mum would buy anything. We were, so she was a single mum on welfare. So we had virtually no money. Like we had enough to survive, but no real money for anything nice except for once in a while. But we sort of scraped by. And so my mum would always find ways to make things all right. So I had nothing but home haircuts for the first 20 years of my life. And that is something you would not wish on anybody. That is probably the most traumatizing part of my childhood. But my mum would buy anything because it was a bargain. It didn't matter whether you needed it or not, but if it was a bargain, you get it because you never know when you might need it down the track, and then you're saving money in the future.
Yeah.
And so she would go, and she was a spender. My whole family are addicts of one kind or another. I've had most of them. And she was basically a shopaholic, but of course she was a shopaholic and had no money. And so she would go to Trash and Treasure, which was these flea markets that were on every Sunday. There was one in Dandenong and one in Montana. And she would go there and come back with just a whole sort of, those old sort of shopping trolley cart things that old ladies with scarves used to hoik around in the old days. And she used to go out to a Trash and Treasure and come back with just one of those, if not more, just full of just broken secondhand shit that just did not work but was remarkably cheap. And then there'd be a sort of story attached to each of them and said, oh, this is, this if you bought this new, this would be worth, $100, $150 and I got it for $25. It's like, yeah, Mum, but it's a table and it only has 3 legs.
Yeah.
And so it took me many, many years to realise that perhaps this was a false economy and you might be better off just spending money on something you actually use. But there's a very strong primal urge to get something because it's cheap. And I still get, it's like FOMO as well. And I'm constantly bombarded with messages from eBay. I spend half my time on Gumtree.
Yeah.
Gumtree is my new Twitter. It's like Twitter that costs you money. And just seeking out bargains. And I just picked up a kid's bicycle for $15 in Terry Hills. I didn't see me coming.
I can see how it does become, the addiction is to the chase, the excitement of the potential deal. It sort of reminds me of watching The Castle. They're like, looking at the trading posts and stuff like that. My mum was similar. I guess I had various experiences like that. Like my parents, we grew up in Bentley Moorabbin, owned their own small business, always working. Mum's thing was like yours. She would see something on discount and be like, oh, well, we have to get this. So if I still to this day, and my parents live in Brighton, they've done very well for themselves. They live in a very nice home. They don't need to do this sort of stuff. And if I can walk, they've got a butler's pantry, right? And I walk into the butler's pantry and there's 30 cans of tuna just in the pantry. And I'm just like, how many cans of tuna do you guys have a week? Oh, maybe 2 or 3. And it's just, why do you, they never, I guess for me, I learned this at uni, the whole opportunity cost thing. That really sunk into me then. But so my mum would often do that. But then there was also my grandmother who raised me a lot because we couldn't afford a babysitter. And she was the classic case of she would bring her own foil everywhere. She grew up in Gippsland, wartime baby, depression, all that sort of stuff. And, everything. You'd have foil for everything to take it home.
Yeah.
Which is just so funny to look at.
I'm totally on board with that. I'm with that. I'm now fully OCD about that. When the toilet paper buying spree hit in the first lockdown, my wife just looked at me and I just went, who's laughing now? Because we already had our entire downstairs basement just filled with toilet paper that I bought when it was half price at Coles. Just stacks and stacks of it. I did not have to buy a single roll.
Yeah, that was a weird experience. I mean, I was lucky with that whole, probably the first one here in Victoria. We had been in Japan actually in 2018 or 2019 when they had their latest earthquake. And I saw what happens when people have a fucking meltdown and buy everything. No, it was a typhoon. Sorry, that's right. We're in lockdown because we were in lockdown for 2 days. So I was like, what do you do? Well, the friends that we knew there while we were traveling said, you buy food to sit inside for the next 2 days. And of course, I was like, oh yeah, no worries. We'll get some stuff on the way home. We'd actually filmed a podcast on the Friday, catching the train. I'm like, oh, the train's awfully full for 4 p.m. Like it's absolutely packed. We get to the supermarket and there's nothing.
Yeah.
Like, there's just nothing. And so we ate noodles from 7-Eleven for like 2 days straight. So that's where I learned my lesson. I remember coming up to
it's basically like uni.
Yeah. Coming up to the first lockdown here in Melbourne, I was like, I've got this vibe. It's happened in Hong Kong already. Let's just go buy some things that if the shit really hits the fan, we do have something. But then people proceeded to go and buy like 30 packs of toilet paper and pasta and all that sort of stuff. And it still happens. It still happens in the last.
When it comes to products, you just got to pick and stick. It's like, right, I'm doing the pasta, I'm doing the flour, I'm doing the toilet paper.
There you go.
You've got to commit.
So you studied arts at Melbourne. You majored in history and English. You're working on the student newspaper. Is it Farrago?
It was Farrago, yeah. So you got, like most newspapers, it was a sort of elected role. So it's kind of like it was a political office holder role. So you had to run for it. So I did a year as a kind of sub-editor of Farrago, but I don't think we really knew what sub-editor meant. So it wasn't really a sub-editing role. It was like an assistant editor or something. It was like one of the sections I did the believe it or not, the creative writing section of Farrago. So there's poetry, and there's a lot of bad poetry that I thought was very good, and short stories and stuff. So I was and there were 4 editors and then 4 below them, and I was one of the ones below them. And then the following year, 4 of us ran for editor for Left Focus, and 1 or media officer. So it was kind of weird. So it was a good old fashioned student socialist propaganda structure. So the media officer of the executive government of the day was also the editor of the only student newspaper. So it was 4 of us sharing a role that had already been. It was only funded for 3 people, and then that funding had also been halved because of VSU. Jeff Kennett. It was the first year that Jeff Kennett had introduced voluntary student unionism, and so everyone was pretty poor, but we were poorer than most. I think it was less than the dole.
Yeah, right.
It was a tiny amount, but anyway, still managed to buy a gram of dope a day, and did that, and was just doing the whole student politics, student media, student theatre. Put on a show called Don.
Okay.
When I was there, a musical, of course, because that's the only genuine form of theatre.
So, because my brother, he got he went to Melbourne Uni. He did maths. He was in the science school, so it would have been engineering school. And he was treasurer for. I can't remember if he was treasurer for the Peak student union body or for the engineering school union. But I got a feeling it was for the Peak body, but. Yeah, the thing that he told me is it was all just a cliquey political sort of thing.
Yeah, it was just totally just a scene. It was just a scene. And I don't even know, I mean, what ideology there was kind of secondary to just being in the cool group. I remember one of the Left Focus meetings we had, and my best mate ended up storming out. He was a smart one. He was the one who actually knew about the politics and had, done the reading. But I think that the longest and most fiercely contested meeting we had went for about 3 hours, I think, and it was all about T-shirts and what colour the T-shirts could be. In the end, we settled on lilac, I believe.
Who were like the opposing? Like back then, did you have the Young Liberals or anything like that?
Yeah. So the Young Liberals, it's like with local councils, the Young Liberals rarely ran under their own name. So they'd run under, and basically, frankly, no one really ran under their own name. So Left Focus was kind of like a coalition of the Labor Left and the Greens, and it was actually the result of an alliance. So basically, the Labor right had got in to Melbourne Uni Student Union the year before I started, and they had basically, in good old-fashioned labour rights style, they just cleaned the joint out. They'd signed up all their mates to peppercorn leases for all the shops around the joint. They'd used their allowed
branch stacking
stereos and couches, which all just disappeared the day they got voted out of office. And so the right and the hard left formed this kind of unholy alliance to get rid of them, and they had a power sharing government after that. So it was half Libs, half Greens kind of thing. And then in the election that followed, which was the first one that I was there for, the left just had a clean sweep of all the positions. So Left Focus was a good campaigning machine. It had a good campaign apparatus, and a lot of that was to do with a couple of people at the top, and also the guy who ended up becoming my best mate, who was very young and I think got elected to student council in his first year because he was on the bottom spot on a ticket. It was meant to be an unwinnable spot, and Left Focus won so many spots that they ended up getting into all sorts of problems. One was, well, they had this incredibly young guy. The other was they did some preference deal with the International Association or something where it put them on an unwinnable it gave them a spot on the Left Focus, some dodgy deal. They gave them a spot on the Left Focus ticket for a spot that they were never, ever going to win on student council. And they won because the campaigning was just outstanding and all the others were just useless. And basically would have had a majority on student council, but had to give it away because of this dirty deal we'd done to this International Students Association guy whose name was on the Left Focus ticket. It was all just so dirty and so dodgy.
So looking back at that period in hindsight, and we're sort of leaning towards what your first gig was in sort of the news space, what seemed like the greatest insight to you in hindsight in that period?
The thing I liked most about it was just finding out the way things worked. Uni is a great kind of, well, it's kind of not, because it's sometimes the antithesis of the real world, but it's a good way to be able to practice doing things while being completely insulated from the consequences. So you can be a fuckwit, you can be a crazy student radical, and you can call for revolution, but you're never going to face the firing squad. Or you can put in place crazy policies or say crazy things or write crazy things, and you're not going to end up hauled before the defamation court, or came pretty close a couple of times, or be cancelled. Although that's not true these days. It's a sort of as much as I hate to use the word, but it's a safe space. But instead of a safe space to insulate you from the big bad mean outside world or whatever, which it kind of does, it's a safe space to act like an idiot and have clashes and have fights and try out sort of extreme ideologies.
Experiment.
And experiment with stuff, and Lord knows, and the drugs, without having to face the consequences. And I think that's great as long as you learn from that and grow out of that. And my life has basically, ever since then, has just been one kind of sort of one long mellowing process where I sort of look at that and realise, how stupid and naive I was, and how little I really knew about how the world actually worked. But it was still just. It was just a facility, like being able to put on a show, being able to run a student newspaper. Like for a while, I was trying to get all the ads for the paper as well.
Yeah, right.
And doing all that sort of stuff. And so I was hustling for the show. I was trying to get sponsors and advertising for the show that we put on at the Union Theatre. And all these things actually came in really handy later in life, albeit without the sort of the crazy shit attached. So even when like later on when I was editing sections of the Daily Telegraph and lift outs and things like that, I got sort of thrown at that. Holy crap, what do I do now? I've never done this before. And then I went, oh yes, I have. And I was actually pulling out all the old layout skills that I had 20 years ago doing for Argo, in the middle of the night, and applying that to the paper, and and the paper had kind of never seen it before, and I had all these editors go, "Oh my god, this is amazing! You're the best features editor we've ever had. Where did you?" I'm like, "Oh, so where did you think of that?" Well, I thought about it with a bong in my hand in a dark room at Melbourne Uni Student Union 20 years ago. So it's a great kind of I don't know, petri dish.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and I guess you're one of the few guys where I've done my research and I couldn't find a LinkedIn profile because I know you're not much of a social media guy. I can guess that your first gig out of uni was that cadetship, because it was a cadetship at the Associated Press. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so it's basically I applied for all these jobs and barely got a look in, and then a friend of mine, like I was applying for like typesetting jobs, layout jobs, not even getting a call back, and then I'd almost given up, but I went to see a friend of mine in Tasmania. I borrowed some money from my mum, I think, and scraped together something. And I was basically staying on that friend's couch. She'd gone to Tasmania to dry out, believe it or not, and we thought we should go and hang out. And I got this call from I'd taken this brick mobile phone that my mum's friend Don had. He was the only person we knew who had a mobile phone. It was like this old Motorola thing that flipped out and pulled out the little antenna. I'd taken it just in case someone called back. And I get this garbled call from my mum saying, "Oh, look, someone's called about a job. They want you to come in from an interview." And I said, "Oh my God, that's fantastic. That's unreal. Finally." And it was the first one I'd got. And I went, "Great, I'll do it. Who's it for?" And my mum goes, "Oh, that's just the thing. I didn't quite catch the name." And I'm like, "Mum." And she said, "Oh, it was something P." And I thought it was OUP. I'd applied for a typesetting job at Oxford University Press, believe it or not. And I'm like, "Oh, it's OUP, whatever." And so my mum's got the number, but not the name and of the company or the name of the person I was meant to talk to. She just thought it was John someone. And so I call this number and someone says, AAP. And I'm like, "Is that OUP?" And she goes, No, it's AAP. Can I help you? And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I need to talk to John." And she goes, "There's about 20 Johns who work here. Which one do you want?" I'm like, "I don't know." And basically that was the start of my incredibly professional job in note-taking.
So why? I mean, I guess it sounds like you did this thing at uni, you needed a job in sort of this varying field of media, and you applied for a bunch of stuff, and it was simply that these were the guys that called you back, and that was your second hand. Yeah. Do you think that seems right?
Yeah, look, it did. I guess I've always just sort of gone with the winds. I've just sort of floated along, and I've been very lucky that people have kind of picked me up. I think I've always been very scared of, like a lot of people, I guess, very scared of trying for something and failing and not succeeding. So I'd sort of much rather, feign indifference and then claim credit if something works out. So I desperately wanted a job. I was scared of being left behind at uni. I'd had to pause everything to do the paper or the magazine.
Oh, wow.
And sort of defer a year, and then went back and realised that all my friends had sort of finished their degrees and had gone, and I'm just sitting around like those sad old mature age students that you see sort of stalking the courtyards and the quadrangles of unis across the country. And I thought, shit, I don't want to end up like one of them. So by the time I got the degree, it was maybe like a year or so after everyone I sort of knew had already gone. I was just like, could not wait to just get the fuck out of there. And I felt like I was being sort of left behind. I was back. I had to go back living at home with my mum. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, this is not good, So I was like, a year ago, I was a student newspaper editor now. And so there was that real fear of sort of being left behind. So I was applying for absolutely everything. And to be honest, and this is why I suppose I didn't really think that it was AAP that had called, because I thought it was such a long shot that I'd ever be sort of considered for anything like that. I didn't really know how it worked. I'd never done a journalism degree. So I thought that was, I was applying for jobs way sort of less ambitious than that and not getting even a call back. And so that seemed to me to defy belief. And indeed, and so basically I dropped everything. Once I'd figured it out, I dropped everything. I had to borrow money off the person I'd come to Tasmania with to afford a flight back. I flew back to Melbourne the day after I'd arrived in Tassie. I flew straight back to Melbourne. I got my first ever haircut at a barber shop that day. And I went to my uncle's house, my uncle's flat, I should say, in St Kilda. He was the cool one of the family, managed to get out of Dandenong. I borrowed a suit from him, and the shirt was sort of like covered I looked like a clown. But anyway, and I had this stupid haircut that made me look even worse. I went in for this interview, and I was the last person they were interviewing, and I found out later they'd already got their 3 cadets, so they'd already picked them. But they'd sort of fitted me in because they knew I was coming back, and I was racing to get there. And it was the very last one, and they decided to offer 4 cadetships that year after all.
Yeah,
and so
right.
they added another spot for me.
So the role,
mercy, I guess.
when you look back at the role in hindsight, was it, like I'm guessing with the cadetship, they give you a bunch of everything. Where were the different parts of the business that you were able to look at?
It was the AAP cadetship, I think, was the sort of the last of the great cadetships. It was always very, very highly regarded by other news outlets because it was so comprehensive. I don't even think we have cadets at the Daily Telegraph these days. It's been a while since I've been in the office, but it's a different type of journalism. It's great journalism and it's news-busting journalism, but it's not that sort of comprehensive training style. A cadetship at AAP is kind of like on real proper on-the-job training. So you have shorthand training for a year. A lot of journalists don't have shorthand these days, but mine's terrible, but they did train us and you had to pass it to get it. You rotated through all the bureaus. So you would do general news, you'd do sport, you would do finance, you would do courts, you would do parliament. You would also do a period of sub-editing. You would do a period on the radio desk where you're writing radio scripts. So it's incredibly thorough, incredibly comprehensive, and you can just sort of tell there's that real sort of proper old school journalistic training back when journalism was a real trade and a craft rather than a sort of a profession or an ideology or whatever it is they're teaching in J schools these days. I don't know, but
yeah. It's very different from what previous generations had. I mean, the idea of a cadetship probably ended after my generation finished with uni. Like, I don't think I remember seeing cadetships at various types of organizations, but yeah, like even I remember the days of like you could get a cadetship at like a bank or an insurance company. Like that did exist. And I always lamented the fact that I was part of the first generation where in some of those spaces you couldn't do it anymore because I was frustrated with uni.
Yeah, it's a real shame, and it's I've never really understood why journalism needed to be a university degree or what you would actually teach. I've always thought journalism is the vessel, journalism is the pipe, not the water. So. Yeah. It's a trade. It's a series of skills you build up to be able to communicate things and to know the basics of what to go, who to talk to, how to hustle, how to build up your contacts, and all that stuff. You really only learn on the job, I think. And then whatever else what you use that for, that's in you. That's what you know. That's what you've learned. What you've picked up. I don't really see how you can be, taught to have an opinion or taught to
being taught to have an opinion seems odd.
Taught to write in a certain way or how you should frame it, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So if you look back at that period, and then because a lot of the work that you do now and have done since probably 2010 has been opinion based.
Yeah.
When you look at that time at AAP, what was the greatest principle that you learned that you apply still to this day? Definitely not shorthand.
Definitely not shorthand. It was it was I loved AAP, and it's still, a lot of the editors there were like sort of father figures to me, and again, all my I'd moved from Melbourne to Sydney. I didn't really know a soul, so that place became like my family. but I ended up becoming the state political editor in New South Wales political correspondent. And part of that job involved writing what AAP called news analysis, I think it was. And it was basically a column, but AAP, of course, being a news wire and a strictly sort of who, what, when, where, and why sort of thing, it completely eschewed opinion. So you were not allowed to have an opinion at AAP. And that was one of the most valuable things I learned. So how to write just really straight news, straight down the line. Every assertion that you make had to be backed up with a quote. So if you said someone said something, you couldn't just say they'd said it. You had to actually present the quote saying they'd said it. Again, you had to have the who, what, when, where, and why. So those real kind of basics. You had to, know what the most important thing was and how to put that up the top, which sounds simple but is often hard. And you had to know how to do it all in 3 lines, in a 30-word lead, no more. And once you can do that and mastered that, then you could sort of pick that up and throw it away and do crazy stuff, gonzo stuff, opinion stuff, feature stuff, colour stuff, whatever. But if people who try to do that, who try to run before they can walk, so to speak, and don't have those basics, it shows very, very clearly, and you can see, if you don't have that really sharp, crisp, clear sort of training drilled into you. And then you go and write a feature, for example, you'll find very easily it becomes purpley and adjective-laden and sprawling, and that can happen to the best of us, even if we've had all that training. But so you see, and you can see it in pieces. You can see, well, this person clearly hasn't done that stuff. So anyway, long story short, I ended up writing these, weekly sort of news analysis pieces, and they were getting more and more opinionated. A lot of the other journos in the press gallery really liked them and would read them, and that was the bit that I enjoyed the most. That they, we'd go to the pub, we'd go to the Shaky or whatever, and they'd say, "I like what you did there," or blah 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 blah, and I'd say, "Thank you very much." They'd say, "Oh, you really think this guy's going to be leader, or do you think blah 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 blah?" And I ended up pushing the envelope too far one week and sent it through to the editor for transmission and putting it out on the wire. And it was sort of held up, and it was a Friday, and we're about to go to the pub or whatever, and I'd come back to the office to go out with the people in Sydney Bureau, and I'd go and see the editor and say, "Hey, what do you think of my piece this week?" And he just looked at me and said, "I hate it." I'm like, "What?" And this guy was like, again, he was like a father figure to me. He was the national editor. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" This is the guy who hired me, by the way. This was the John.
Yeah, right.
This is the guy who got me there years ago, and I said, "What do you mean you hate it?" And he says, all this stuff here, this is all your opinion, you're saying this is bad or this is good or whatever. And I said, "Yeah, but it is bad. Like, it's not my opinion. That is just, it is a fact that this minister is completely fucked up, or it's a fact that what has happened is disgraceful, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "No, we can't say that. We are a news wire. We do not do opinion. We do news." And I went, "Oh, but come on, man," and I'm trying to sort of, in the end, we sort of managed to sort of knock a few of the edges off, and it went out, and it had all those terrible qualifiers, like some would say this could be the end of his career, or all those stupid qualifiers that weaken a piece. But anyway, and I was also chasing yarns. I wanted to bust exclusives. All the other journos were doing it. I was breaking stories, and then they were kind of getting either shut down or because AAP didn't really do exclusives, they were often very skeptical of them. And they'd say, "Well, hang on, why doesn't everyone else have this?" Because I'm the only one who's got it. This is an exclusive. You see them in the newspaper that we read every day. This is not what we do. We do we do what happens in the day, the press conferences, who says what happens in Parliament. We do that so that the newspapers can go and bust exclusives. So if you want to get exclusives, if you want to have an opinion, you need to go over there. This is not the place for you. And it was said with, a great deal of love and affection, but also a great deal of kind of firmness. And so I thought, all right, well, I'll go.
Yeah, it sounds like they were watering you down a bit. But
but
also probably that you matured.
Yeah, it wasn't. I don't want it to reflect badly on it. It was more just like it was kind of like they said, "You know what, man, this is just not the place for you. You need to. What you want to do is out there. not here. And maybe, I don't want to say they were sort of holding me back, but I think maybe they sort of felt like that. And then, to be honest, that's a really common thing. AAP is very much a training ground for journos, and they know that, you know, a lot of the good ones will sort of go elsewhere. It's kind of like they're like your kids or whatever, you know, they leave home, and an AAP is kind of like the perpetual empty nester.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, at the end of the day, like I said earlier, you needed a job. You needed a place in the media space, and you needed somewhere that could give you good grounding. And now that you had it, you were probably getting back to the roots of what you enjoyed most at the uni newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. It's that's why AAP beat out all the stuff I was doing at the uni newspaper, and that was great. And that needed to sort of happen. A bit like the army, you know, break them down and rebuild them.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. But you can only suppress it
That's right, but then it comes back. That's right.
So I guess the interesting thing is, you know, you move from AAP, then the Tally. I think over time, you know, you had opportunity to do more and more commentary. I don't know what the time difference was between starting at the Tally and doing commentary, but I think the first one I had found was 2010. You know, various bits on the drum, Q&A.
Yeah, wow, you really have done your research.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. I mean, it's pretty easy with guys like yourself. There's a lot of info out there, but, you know, morning show, Paul Murray live. Then there was the thing that I found you from was Dumb, Drunk and Racist. I think that was a really good series. I think a lot of people in our generation saw that. Less so radio. I know you had stints on Triple M and you've got 2GB now.
Yeah.
You're doing... or you were doing the Daily Telegraph segment. But where do you think that first inkling of opportunity came when you went to the Tally and then had this opportunity to expand into other mediums?
Well, I suppose my hero when I was in the New South Wales Parliament Press Gallery was David Pemberthy, and he was a state political reporter for the Daily Telegraph at the time. He was extremely funny. He was an extremely good writer, and he had a weekly column as well that was just hilarious. And the way he covered politics as well was very funny, very sharp, very illuminating. He was, you know, his politics were a lot like mine, kind of, you know, centrish, Labourish, but not afraid to take the piss, and certainly not beholden to all that sort of, you know, pearl clutching sort of offenderati stuff that's sort of overtaken a lot of the sort of the new left, if you like, or maybe it's just the old left that's just keep going, and I don't know. But anyway, but I loved him, and he was kind of my idol, and I was like, I want to be like Mike, you know. And so I basically, you know, I realised I sort of had to get out of AAP, and I wanted to go over to the Telly. I started talking to Pembo about it, and he eventually found a job, sort of created a job for me, or found a job for me, which was to go over as the I'd always loved the industrial relations round. That was my other big thing. So it was always politics and IR were my two great loves. So sort of, you know, again, the Labor Party, the union movement, that's the stuff I was obsessed with. I loved finding out all the nooks and crannies, how it worked, all the shadowy deals, all the way in which deals were struck, who was in charge, who was really in charge, you know, who were the people pulling the strings. And again, I also like that, you know, for me, that's the sort of the backbone of the Labor Party as well, the actual Labor bit, you know, you know, decent pay and conditions for working people, and instead of all the stupid sort of woke identity politics crap that is distracting the left so much these days. So I went over to the Telly as the workplace reporter. That was my round. Absolutely loved that. Hit the ground running. I was told as soon as I went in to sort of meet the people. I don't think I even put in a job application, but I got called in to sort of meet everyone before I started, and I guess that was my job interview. I'm not sure, but they said, look, you know, they wanted me to write opinion as well. Pembo read my weekly things, and I was like, He said they were really good, probably because they were just like what he was writing, because I was desperately trying to imitate him. And they said, look, we want you to, you know, want you to write, if you ever want to write opinion or commentary or whatever, we want you to do that. We want you to write whatever you want. If you want to, and I'll never forget it because it was a great line. But if they said if Piers Ackerman writes something, and you vehemently disagree with it, we'll say so. Write something and say, this is absolute bollocks, and here's why, and go to town. I said, really? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And it's like, obviously we'll disavow all knowledge and you'll probably be fired, but yeah, go for it. But yeah, so again, contrary to the myth that that last bit was a joke, by the way, for all the conspiracy theorists listening, contrary to the myth that everyone's sort of handed some kind of, News Corp playbook when they come here. I was brought in, people knew all my prejudices or biases or whatever, or leanings. And I was actively encouraged to be to write opinion, and actively told to have no fear about disagreeing with any conservative or right wing or commentary elsewhere in the paper. And that was explicitly said to me. And again, I remember it just clear as a bell.
There's a brilliant show, a BBC show that was about just that, and it showed the difference between, God, I wish I could remember the name of it. It showed the differences between your classic News Corp style organization versus your Guardian and whatnot. And it seemed like, your News Corp sort of organization, and Succession is another good one. But in this series, it just showed that at the end of the day, they just want views. It's all, it's a media business.
They just want audience. They want eyeballs. It's like anything else. If you, obviously, if you write the Communist Manifesto and it's boring and it's shit, then this is my little, hello, darling. This is my little thing. Then, no one's going to read it. And that's the problem. A lot of commentary is just plain boring. It's not being censored. It's being cut because it's crap.
Yeah,
and
right.
So that's, and then people say, oh, it's censorship because, whereas, if you write something in an interesting way, no one is going to care whether it's left, right, or the other, as long as it's compelling. And then also I think you have to be, I find nothing more boring than people just saying the same thing week in, week out, or reciting their own party's particular line on something, or there's some columnists you can kind of set your watch to. Hello, darling. And it's
you know exactly what they're going to say.
Whereas I suppose the reason why I perhaps frustrate or puzzle, or why people think all sorts of things about me, is that every time that people expect me to act in a certain way or have certain views on things. People might have seen Dumb, Drunk and Racist and expected me to hold the Green Left ABC line on every single issue, and then when I don't, they think I'm some kind of traitor to the cause.
Yeah, right.
And I think that gets you a lot more. Confusion breeds anger, and anger breeds contempt, and that's why I think people like me, and to some extent, people like Lee Sales, you see some of the fury at her when she. Labor leaders, because there seems to be some sort of unspoken expectation that because she's from the ABC that she won't interrogate Labor leaders.
I always found that really, really interesting.
And Chris Uhlmann's another one. So people sort of in the middle seem to get far more hate from the extreme left than people on the right, I think, because perhaps they're seen as traitors to the cause, or perhaps... Yeah,
and they haven't picked a side or whatever.
And in a sense, it's sort of more dangerous. Andrew Bolt is not going to change many minds or many votes. No. But if someone in the middle or someone on the centre left or the moderate left starts saying, actually, these people on the extreme left are wrong about this, or they're crazy about this, or they're a bit dangerous or reckless in this or that way, well, in a sense, that's much more dangerous for people who hold those extreme positions, because the criticism is coming from a credible source.
You. Yes, you. Are you intrigued by this episode? If so, go to our footer on the website, neuralle.com, neuralle.com. We're going to give you an insight each week. It's going to be on business, marketing, or a topic that we covered in the episode at all. We'd love your support, and it would help us in developing the intellect around this series. But without going on too much longer, let's get back into this episode. It's a very interesting point, this whole discussion around political leanings. I always thought, the funniest thing that I found with the whole friendly Geordies thing is because I like Jordan. I actually think he's a good guy. But I got to say, in the last, probably since COVID, he's definitely doubled down on that sort of more crazy left stuff. And because he has a big audience, he plays into a lot of things as well. So I found it really odd when he was having a go at you, because I like both of you and what you both say in your opinion pieces. And I always thought that your type of opinion, at least politically, wasn't really, like, I wrote it down here. I always picked you as a middle of the road guy like myself who picks teams based on policy that aligns with you personally. Like, there's not a specific, I think my friend said it to me the other day. He's like, the good thing about Jordan is you don't know what team he's for. Because we got this mate who's like, he's just an outright conservative, and he's always, like, society today, family values and all this other bullshit. Yeah. And I'm like, where did this come into this conversation? Like, what? How's a teacup got anything to do with family values? But, one of the things that Friendly Geordie said is when he was on his rant is like this whole idea of propaganda coming from certain media assets. And I don't know where I really sit on it, because I understand that, at the end of the day, Murdoch owns a vast majority of press here, but also it's a business. And I wonder whether, like, how much truth do you think there is to pushing the idea of certain teams from certain, whether it's Murdoch Press, The Guardian, etc. How much of that do you think actually exists versus is just a meme?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First, I mean, my politics they're pretty centrist, but basically, fundamentally, I'm a Labor guy. I'm a sort of Labor right guy, and that's where I sort of sit. I do not like what you might call woke green left politics that are obsessed with identity, or politics that believe in certain views being cancelled or censored. So I despise all that kind of stuff. I'm very much about the bread and butter of looking after people at the bottom of society and bringing them up. I'm a big believer in getting people into jobs and having those jobs being well paid and having people treated with dignity. And I'm a big believer in a strong state health system and strong state education system. And that's pretty much about it. I think that's pretty much all a government really has to do to be doing its job. And then, there might be sort of stuff on the sides, but, like issues like the Republic, who gives a toss really? As long as people are fed, they've got good jobs, I don't really care who the head of state is. I think there's certainly an argument for constitutional recognition for Indigenous people, because that is, I think, a very important issue. But again, I think far more important is actually lifting those living conditions on the ground. And I've been out there and I've seen it, and getting things like, literacy, school attendance, health rates up. I mean, that is a real important thing. That is the life and death stuff we have to do in that area. And yet it seems to me the stuff that gets the least attention compared to things like constitutional recognition, Australia Day, whatever. So my position is very much a pragmatic one and a practical one. And I think that is largely the position of most sort of sensible people.
Yeah, like at least 70% of the people.
In Australia, they want bread and butter stuff. They want to know what's in it for me, and also is this really important. And apart from that, they pretty much want the government to leave them alone, not tell them what to think, and certainly not tell them that they're racist, and not take their money away from them. So I think the left, the sections of the left, the ideological left, or the woke left, or the identity politics obsessed left, or the inner city left that wants to talk about nothing but climate change, for example, I think they have that has been a distraction from those bread and butter issues. That is why on a federal level, Labor has only won one majority election in the last 25 years. On a state level, Labor's done much better because it's much more simply about service delivery. It's about that bread and butter stuff. So, when Anastasia Palisade focuses on jobs, she gets elected. When Dan Andrews focuses on trains, he gets elected. But when people think that Labor is obsessed with airy-fairy stuff, and to some extent I think climate change is a symbol of that, it's not the policy itself, but the idea that they're thinking about this some sort of abstract thing, this target thing, this international thing, instead of what's happening to workers in their communities and who are trying to hold on to their homes. I think that is where some of that disconnect comes in between Labor and the regions and the suburbs. So I know I'm taking the long way home, but Labor has not won a single. The left on the new left, if you like, on these sort of more tangential issues, as it's drifted further away from real bread and butter stuff, it has not won a single election, bar one in 2007, in the last 25 years. And then, of course, as soon as it won that majority election, it then completely fucked it up and lost its mind. The government became dysfunctional, and then they knifed the first-term Prime Minister for the first time since World War II. So that is absolute insanity. That came after News Corp, and so I'm getting to your question. That came after News Corp overwhelmingly and openly backed Kevin Rudd for the Prime Ministership. So the Australian editorialised for it, the Daily Telegraph editorialised for it, the Courier Mail editorialised for it. I think all the Sunday papers editorialised for it. I think the Herald Sun might have been the only one that still they'd have it. So there's your mastheads there. That is in accordance with time-honoured tradition where newspapers editorialise for one side or the other, and do so in their editorial pages, and will declare who they're going for in the last edition before the election. So that is what happened. That is what happened. They all the News Corp papers backed Kevin Rudd for the Prime Ministership, and then the Labor Party knifed him. And when everyone, the entire country, the entire electorate rejected that decision, as did most people working for News Corp, as did I. I was following Kevin Rudd around, on his listening tour. I was there on election night. I was the only journalist in Rudd's private election victory party. There was no fucking conspiracy against this guy, I can promise you that. If anything, there was a conspiracy for him. And you can argue whether that is an even greater shame. If News Corp was biased, it was biased for the Labor Party and biased for Kevin Rudd. And Pembo's written about this as well. And it wasn't us that turned on him. His party turned on him. His party knifed him. And then we said, well, hang on a minute. And you still think that we all have to support you after you don't even support yourselves? That you can just knife whoever you want and then expect, and then if all of News Corp doesn't back you again, somehow that's right-wing bias now, is it? So the answer to your question is, is there a concerted, campaign, or is there a propaganda line from News Corp? Absolutely. Well, if there was any propaganda, it was for Kevin Rudd in 2007, and then it's fair to say the whole joint went tits up, and that was not our doing. And I think if you ask anyone in the Labor Party now, and they will say that what happened in 2010 was a terrible mistake, and it ruined the careers of two Prime Ministers, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. And Labor might well still be in power today if that hadn't have happened. And there was no policy basis for it. There was no polling basis for it. It was all just built on a house of cards and a house of lies. So, but of course, that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to acknowledge. And so what do? They look for a bogeyman. So they say, oh, no, it's all News Corp's fault because, after Labor shut itself and committed harikari, Rupert Murdoch didn't fall into line and just back the new guy or the new guy. Like, this is madness. And there are plenty of people, there are plenty of people in News Corp who have been incredibly critical of the Liberals' follies as well. I mean, the term delusional conservative, Delcon, saying how crazy Tony Abbott was to think he'd ever come back. That was coined by Miranda Devine, one of the most read columnists and most prolific columnists in the stable. And she was writing in defence of Malcolm Turnbull and saying Tony Abbott should shut up and back off, and all his supporters are Delcons, and she copped all the crap for that. And then Malcolm Turnbull says, oh, now News Corp's against me. Well, yeah, some people are, the same people who never wanted him to become Prime Minister in the first place. One of our most high-profile Opinion Rose was constantly, it was constantly being attacked by the right of the Liberal Party for defending him, like bloody Joan of Arc. She was being burnt at the stake. But people don't remember that. They think all of News Corp is just Andrew Bolt.
It's like a chicken and egg thing, and it's on both sides as well, because I always find it interesting when I find someone like Jordan ranting about that sort of stuff. Like, one thing I'd find is he'd probably agree with you on so many topics, because he is, when it comes to Labor topics, an old school kind of guy. But there's always just this meme on it's either side of politics. It's, if it's the right, it's, there's this conspiracy on your Twitterati, the Guardians of the world, the Financial Times, etc. And you saw that was like a good old trope in the US over the last few elections. But then on the left, it's the same thing. And so, you as an individual, when you're often stuck in the middle of this, it's hard to make your mind up, because you see these comments on social media and you're like, well, who's right? And it often becomes like a chicken and egg thing. Is it because this newspaper is just following the mood of their audience?
No, I think there's the conspiracy there. And to be honest, I don't really know anything. If you ask me, the Friendly Geordies guy, I don't know anything about him really. I've seen only a few snippets of what he said, and he seems to me fairly unhinged. But the idea that there's all this sort of media conspiracy or there's all this top-down sort of propaganda is delusional, and I think it's an excuse for that the left gives itself for not being able to win the popular argument and not being able to win elections. So instead of, looking inwardly and saying, well, maybe the sort of things we're talking about aren't resonating with the electorate.
Yeah.
They instead say, oh, no, this is all because of a propaganda machine by Rupert Murdoch to tell people what to think. Now, again, the thing with the media landscape is it's not necessarily about who's telling who what to do or who's right or who's wrong or whatever. But if you look at the whole media landscape in totality, it's actually pretty reflective of the whole population, and it's pretty reflective of what people think. So there's plenty of left-wing opinion. There's plenty of left-wing commentary. There's plenty of, unbiased reporting that a lot of people would argue is subconsciously biased towards the left, like, the right's constant criticism of the ABC that, even when it reports the news or presents the facts, it's skewed on things like subject matter towards issues that the left are obsessed with, like climate change or asylum seekers or whatever. Now, I'm not necessarily buying into that argument, but that is something that the right says about the ABC, just as the left says the same things about News Corp.
Yeah.
If anything, you could argue that at least News Corp is pretty open as to, Andrew Bolt doesn't pretend that he's reporting the news. It's clearly an opinion. Same with, Piers Ackerman or the Sky After Dark people. And then some people do say, but maybe the story selection is biased, but maybe it's actually just geared towards the audience of that particular paper. I mean, I looked at the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, and everyone else is talking about Linda Reynolds or talking about, the raising of the dole rate. And the front page of the Daily Telegraph is about a new plan to track down bikies who are in hiding overseas. Because that law and order stuff, the crime stuff, the gang stuff, that's what Telly's bread and butter. It's cop yarns. People love crime stories, and Telly's readers love crime stories, and so they read about them. They also love horse racing. That's why we've got a form guy. So,
yeah, I think it's like a type of cognitive dissonance. I think it is.
If you look at the media landscape, kind of, if you like, sort of as a parliament, as a bunch of outlets, and it's very broad these days. I don't think you can pretend that anyone's got a monopoly. But, if you look at it as a parliament where you've got different members of it representing different parts of the community, it's pretty much about where it needs to be. It's pretty much about right. So, you've got, the Daily Telegraph, you've got, the broadsheets like the Oz and the Sydney Morning Herald. You might call sort of, centre right and centre left if you had to, but both have a pretty wide diversity of opinion and story coverage within them. The Oz, I think, does a fantastic job covering Indigenous affairs, stories that are completely ignored by other outlets, including those that would claim to be most progressive and care most about that issue. You've got The Guardian, which has a huge readership. And then you've got the Daily Mail, which is just, celebrities in bikinis. You've got the ABC, which is this huge sort of, this huge multimedia monolith, which is gets more eyeballs and ears than any other news source in Australia. And there's obviously conservatives believe that to be biased to the left. And again, I don't necessarily agree with that, but bias is always in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing that I've always found. But I think you're hitting on something, which is this idea of, I think Jordan Peterson has spoken about it. The left as a group is always more decentralized, and so in the world of media, that is far more decentralized. Therefore, they're not congregated into one, say, holding group company that, say, a more conservative leaning group may be. So, this argument that News Corp is, just this propaganda machine that only exists in this sphere of politics, I think is a little naive, because if you go on Twitter, if you go on other forms of social media, there's a clear bias, I think, towards a center-left point of view. And so I think it sort of just evens it out. But I've always wondered, and it must be interesting for you being on the inside of one of these organizations, why do these people like a Jordan Shanks, who is a smart guy, why did they come up with this sort of stuff? And, why do you see the Donald Trumps of the world sort of complaining about, the media didn't give me fair reporting? And I do think it probably comes down to cognitive dissonance. It's easier for the brain to say that than to find an actual...
Well, I think, as I said, there's a couple of things. Again, it comes back to it's much easier for the left to say, again, this is something that Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and I suppose this idea that there's a Murdoch conspiracy all have in common, which is that you can't accept that you lost an election fair and square. You can't accept that the people actually rejected you. Kevin Rudd can't accept that the Labor Party caucus rejected him, and that then the people rejected him when he came back in 2013. And so he says, well, it's all Donald Trump. It's all Rupert Murdoch's fault. It's all a Murdoch conspiracy against me. Donald Trump couldn't accept that people voted against him. So he says, well, it's all left.
It's election fraud.
It's all election fraud. It's the voter machines don't work, or it's the left, or it's fake news. Every criticism of it is fake news. So again, this is what unhinged and deranged people say when they don't want to concede that, their own ideas are not winning in the community, that they're simply not being voted for. The Labor Party had every chance to win the last election, and it didn't, because it was perceived to be out of touch with and potentially even at odds with, ordinary kind of aspirational people, and some of the symbolism around franking credits and negative gearing, I think, was kind of emblematic of that it didn't like people who were trying to get ahead, that it was trying to put its hand in people's pockets in retirement, and that it had this idea of a kind of us and them, that if you had a second house, you must be one of them, you must be rich, you must be from, quote unquote, the top end of town. People hate that kind of language. They hated it. They rejected Corbyn on the same basis, emphatically. And that comes up again and again. So that's why they got voted out. It wasn't a Murdoch conspiracy. Everyone thought, including most Murdoch commentators, everyone thought that Shorten was a shoo-in. Everyone thought, I thought he was going to win.
I thought he was going to win.
Everyone did. But the people had other ideas. So far from, if the people had done what they were told by just about everybody, then they would have voted in Shorten in a landslide. But in fact, they quietly made up their own minds and proved just about everyone wrong. And if we as thinkers or politicians or commentators or people in the media aren't trying to figure out and understand what makes people tick and why they think what they think, what's important to them, what their values are, then we are simply not doing our jobs. And to say that it's all a top-down media conspiracy or it's all a propaganda machine, it's just lazy. It's unintelligent. It's just lazy. So it's the sort of thing that could only come from someone who has never actually been in a newsroom or knows how these things work. Because if you look at the totality of audiences in Australia. I'm sure News Corp would only have a small fraction. And also our biggest platform, which is news.com.au, which is the one I write for, is often accused of being left-wing. And, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. But, these are people who, I don't know. I think the left would do much better to actually look at itself and find out why people aren't voting for it.
I think the lesson I've learned from this particular chat is that if you as an individual find yourself in that middle political group where you don't necessarily lean to one or the other, you can often lean back on an objectively true statement that is, your team didn't win or your team hasn't won based on this. And that is all you have to do to sort of nullify the conversation, the not so much uncomfortable conversation, but conversations with people who are more passionate, let's say, about politics. So I think that's a very valuable lesson that people can learn. Before we get into rapid fire questions, because I know we've been going for a bit now, I know you've had that recent bone with Facebook. I saw your piece, read it. I think on one side, I fully understand where Facebook is coming from, although I think it is a bit ridiculous now that they, as essentially the public square, there was a piece by Niall, what's his name? Niall Square and the Tower. Brilliant book. And it's about how these platforms have become The Square and the Tower by Niall Ferguson. And it talks about how these platforms have essentially, they're basically public media assets now. Contrary to what they want to be, they do need to be regulated in some format. And that's always been my view, I think, in the last couple of years. We don't know what the policy is, so it's a bit hard to talk about what's going to happen. We had this update from Frydenberg yesterday about news supposedly coming back on platform. How likely do you think it is that these platforms need to be regulated?
It's a very hard one. Like with everything, they obviously need some regulation, but it needs to be. It's obviously got to be sensible, and it's got to be done with a light touch. And I actually think the legislation, as it stands, kind of did that. It basically says, listen, you guys sort out a deal amongst yourselves, otherwise we'll be forced to do it for you. It's kind of the equivalent of a parent saying to the squabbling children, don't make me come in there. So it's the government saying, listen, you obviously need to sort something out because the current situation is untenable and unfair. It's not so much regulating what Facebook can and can't say or can and can't use as much as it is stopping Facebook from sort of coming in and basically just hollowing out newsrooms. And again, as I said in my piece, the problem is that the problem is not that they are taking the product. The problem is that they are taking the product and the people who pay for the product. So if Facebook was just taking the news that we produced at News or the ABC or Nine newspapers or whatever, and spreading that around, that'd be fantastic. That'd be no problem whatsoever. And they could have it for free as long as we still had the advertisers that paid for that, because journalism is expensive. And the problem is that they're taking the advertisers too. So I guess the message of the legislation is that, and the campaign by the traditional media, is that you can't have it both ways. If you're going to take the advertisers and then their money, then you have to pay for what they used to pay for, and you have to pay us because you are using our product to get those advertisers. That's part of your business model. And that's what it's really about. It's not really about a town square cop, if you like, coming in saying this is what you're allowed to say, or this is what you're allowed to have, or this is what you're allowed to share. It's about keeping journalism alive, and some form of professional journalism alive, which, believe it or not, is, I think, still very, very valuable. Because otherwise you do end up with just a world full of opinion and no facts, and we know how volatile that can make the political situation. And then in terms of sort of regulating Facebook as a marketplace of ideas or a town square, I think I'm always amazed. The first rule of free speech surely is that, incitement to harm, incitement to violence, the old cliche of shouting fire in a crowded theatre. That is the line. That's where you say, all right, well, that's not okay. That's free speech. That's not free speech. That's an act of violence. If you're calling for someone to be harmed or effectively harming them yourself with, barrage of abuse or threats or whatever it may be, that is the threshold. And I've always found it absolutely staggering that online platforms and often the people who use them and often the people who call themselves progressives who use them seem to think that the violent language and the calls to harm or the abuse is okay and should be encouraged even and is often allowed and not shut down and often seen as the purpose of these forums, these fora. But to express a view that is divergent from the latest fashionable view or the an ideologically left point of view or whatever, that speech is somehow hate speech, and that speech is the speech that needs to be censored. And I think we've seen sort of all sorts of double standards. Often people are so distracted by the one thing that they ignore the other.
Yeah, I think, and that's what you wrote in that piece, is that, there's the same platform which allowed the guy in Christchurch to publicly kill 50 plus people, and then cries foul about these other topics, which I think that is the issue that a lot of these platforms have, and why I think it should just be taken out of their responsibility in that there should be a certain code for certain social media platforms that is universal, that people understand, because some platforms are different than others in terms of the way that they will ban certain things. I mean, I've had the greatest example with this recently with a platform like TikTok, in that it uses an algorithm just to cut stuff. If you say anything, you do anything, you show anything on certain topics, they'll just cut it completely. And then you have to go through a review process. And I think by having some form of statute or something stated by a communications body, I think would be handy, and it would take a lot of these entire arguments out at all. But I think I think this year is really going to draw a lot of this to a head. I think we're getting to that point, and I think Australia is leading the way with this code. So it's sort of let's revisit this in a year and see what happens.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I think the reason why Facebook has completely folded, which it has done, there's no question about that. However, it tries to spin it, is because they've realised it's sort of belled the cat. It's made people realise how omnipotent they are, and also how false their claim of just wanting to bring people together or to or being a good, responsible corporate citizen is. That these are people who are not afraid to use and abuse their market power at the drop of a hat, without warning, without due process, to get what they want. And I think everyone just went, and obviously, Mark Zuckerberg does not pick up the phone 6 times to a lowly Pacific Middle Power treasurer unless he's really worried about the reputational damage to his company. And I know it's huge, but it's suffered massive damage with the Cambridge Analytica stuff, massive damage with the Christchurch shooting stuff. And I think this was almost going to be a sort of 3 strikes and you're out. And Facebook's huge, but MySpace was huge once. And look what happened to that, Rupert Murdoch bought it and it stopped being cool. Like the tech world is a boom bust cycle. Twitter has got all sorts of financial problems, for example. There's no guarantee that it's going to be around forever and a day, So I think these guys are aware of that, and Facebook might not be forever, and something else will probably come and take its place. And then, I imagine it will think twice before it starts banning legitimate news stories.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I want to jump into some rapid fire questions to finish things off.
Yeah.
What's a topic you wish you could talk about more regularly in these interviews that you never get asked about?
Country music.
Okay. You like country music? I
like country music a lot. I like But I don't. But I only like good country music.
Yeah.
People always say, what kind of music do you like? I say good music. So Lyle love it, but none of the filler. Joshua Judge's Ruth, take or leave that. But Pontiac, now there's an album.
Definitely not Florida Georgia Line.
I'm the only person who thought it was Julia Roberts who got lucky by marrying him.
Okay.
And again, yeah, Shania Twain, but Lucinda Williams, come on, you know what I'm talking about?
I got to say, country music, thanks to things like TikTok, you look at songs like, I don't know what it's called. It's this mashup of hip hop with country music has made country way more popular amongst my generation. Like I know a lot of guys my age now who can, what's the event that's on every year at this famous theatre?
Grand Ole Opry?
The Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
I have heard that term by more people in my generation the last year than my entire life.
Yeah. So it's
just saying something.
Like it ironically.
Yeah.
I liked it before it was ironic.
Yeah, whatever. I'm not sure that leather jacket wearing Joe in 99 was liking country music.
Because I'm wearing a leather jacket. That's great.
All right, morning and evening routine. What does that look like?
Well, it's swapped. I've gone backwards. So it used to be that I'd get up in the morning and off I'd go to work at Studio 10 and then it'd be all done and dusted by midday. And now all the stuff I'm doing is at night. So I spend, I get up, I take the kids to school, then I twiddle my thumbs and try to feel like a useful member of society. I stack the dishwasher very methodically. I potter around and try to look for things to fix. I do podcast interviews with extremely wise and handsome hosts like yourself, and just sort of bits. There's always sort of someone will want me for a radio or a TV thing or on something, or ask me to do a piece or something. So I'm doing, so all sorts of things. But I've got used to writing at night as well. So everything starts. When I was working, all day during the day, I got into the habit of sitting down with a beer and then starting to write stuff. And so now I've found that I can't really write during the day either. So the whole day is kind of like this massive waste of space where I'm just going around trying not to feel like I'm unemployed. And, going for long, pointless drives in my car to pick up things from Gumtree. And then it gets to, and then I basically, then at night I'm on either GB or Sky or writing stuff. And then I stay up far too late. I was watching Terminator 3 last night, Rise of the Machines, very underrated.
Right. Yeah.
So I end up doing that. Then I'll either fall asleep on the couch or make it to bed and then wake up with my wife screaming at me again saying it's time to take the kids to school.
Well, what time do you start writing if you do write that night?
It depends. Sometimes, so I'm working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights every week. And then, I might start at like a five. You don't want to crack a beer before 5. That means you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So I try to hold out till 5. Then I'll kind of start. And then on the nights I'm working, I'll come home and often start writing at sort of, 9:30, 10, even 11 o'clock at night and just get it going.
There you
see
go.
What happens, see what comes out. And then you wake up the next morning and read it and go, whoa.
Last question for you, being that you are a bit of a Gumtree fan, best purchase under $200?
You know what? I reckon one has just arrived on my doorstep this morning, and it was a weird. Do you remember the 1986 Transformers movie? Probably before you were born. Okay. But remember they killed off Optimus Prime. Spoiler alert. Do you remember that? It traumatized just about everyone in Gen X.
Okay.
So the first ever Transformers movie, this cartoon one, Optimus Prime dies. He gets fully killed off. Everyone thought he was going to come back at the end. Nah. And it just fucked with people's heads. Anyway, in an effort to try to remedy this, the toy company, because all they wanted to do was just kill off all the old characters so they could bring out new toys that everyone would buy. And instead, everyone just lost their minds. So they kept trying to find new ways to bring Optimus Prime back. And one of the most stupid ways was this kind of weird rainbow Optimus Prime, where you'd have Optimus Prime and then 4 other different coloured robots that would sort of join onto him, and then he'd become this. It looked like, I don't know, it kind of looked like a spider wearing all of the Teletubbies at once. Anyway, I found that on eBay, people bidding for it on eBay, and I thought, oh, I shouldn't. And then I thought, oh, I shouldn't. And then I thought again, oh, I shouldn't. And then, oh, I'll just have one little bid. And I thought it would go for just bazillions of dollars because, you know, it starts really low and then it just goes crazy. And I just kept upping my maximum bid just a tiny bit. And it was sort of staying there, and then something would happen and someone would come in. And I thought, oh, my God, they're doing it manually. They're doing it old school. They're going to come in the last second and try and just go. Anyway, I put in my new maximum bid with literally seconds to go, and I'm thinking, all right, I'm just ahead here, and I put it was $85, and I was sitting on 78, I believe it was, and my top bid was $85, and it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, and suddenly it keeps going up, so it goes, you know. 78, 80, 82, 84. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's trying to get up there and he doesn't know what it is and he's keep putting it up manually. And he just bid 85. So he just got to 85 and he would have obviously gone over. Like if it had one more second, he would have gone 86, just bumped me off, and he would have got this amazing thing for $86. And it just cut out at 85 and I just managed to snare it with literally 0 seconds to go. And it just arrived on my doorstep this morning. And I think it's a sign, Jordan.
Oh, I'm going to want to see a photo of that later on.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm scared. I'm not even going to open it. I'm just going to look at the box and know it's there.
Joe Hildebrand, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Where can they find me? Look, I am still on Instagram because, you know, obviously it would be a crime to hide this face from society. But that's pretty much it. You can find me on news.com.au every Saturday. My column goes up. The 2GB at nights with John Stanley at the moment, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I pop up there. You can get the 2GB app and listen to those things on their own. And then I do Paul Murray Live on Sky at 9 p.m. every Wednesday. And what else is there? I'm writing a feature for Stella about Kyle Sandilands. How good is that going to be? Day in the life of Kyle Sandilands.
That's going to be interesting because I've always I want to film a bit about I have like on my YouTube channel a series called Marketing Mad Lads, and I wanted to do one on Kyle.
I'll put in a good word for you. Me and Kyle, we're like, you know, we're tight.
Joe, thank you so much. We'll link all of that.
Legend. Thank you.
I hope you have a lovely day. And thanks so much for coming on.
I'll keep you posted on the Transformer.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Jordan. Love your work, mate.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode. If you do like it, please subscribe. And of course, like if you're watching the YouTube video as well. We'd really appreciate that. You can also find our Clips channel in the description. For audio, if you're not already listening, you can search Uncommon on Pocket Cast, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts quite easily. For video, if you're not watching, you can search Uncommon on YouTube. And for behind-the-scenes takes and clips on social media, then definitely check out @uncommon_show on Instagram. But otherwise, look, thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, thanks for listening.